Hello, friends, and welcome to Brainpower. I'm your host, Josh. Uh, so glad that you're here with me here for episode number one. I wanted to give you a little bit of background as far as what you can expect every week with Brainpower. So, this is really just hands on training for generative AI. I'm really passionate about the topic, and I cannot wait to share with you each and every week just a little bit about generative AI, how it works, and hopefully you can take away some skills and implement those right away. A couple of house cleaning items here before we get started. Typically, with each episode, you'll be able to download a worksheet or a handout before the episode starts that will include things like hyperlinks and prompts, things like that, that will help you along with each episode. This is a hands-on um, experience, so those downloads are going to be helpful. Now, for episode one, there's no downloads required, so just sit back and enjoy until later on in this episode, we are going to open up ChatGPT and do a little bit of prompting. So have that ready to go. And let's go ahead and let's just jump right into the topic. So, how does ChatGPT work? That's a really good question. And I know when I first got started with ChatGPT back in December of last year, I had no clue. And so that's really what got me involved with learning more about ChatGPT. And so I started doing a little bit of prompting and began to understand how a vector database works and what's happening in the background. But through that exploration, I began to ask a question: what is possible with ChatGPT? And I'm sure you're asking that same question. And when I ask my students what they'd love to do with ChatGPT, here are just some examples. It's pretty diverse. You know, everything from speeding up content development to designing simulations, idea generation. Um, you get the idea. It's vast. And I think that's one of the more complicated things about beginning to work with a large language model like ChatGPT is that there's tons of potential and you just don't know where to start. So we're going to start from ground zero here with learning about how ChatGPT functions. You can also think about other creative applications that you can use ChatGPT for. So here are some additional examples. So let's start by asking the question, what is ChatGPT? Well, let's go ahead and let's break down the name. First, it's chat. Now, this is the big game changer. In November of 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT. Now, GPT as a technology was there, but it didn't have the chat interface. And so this is the big game changer, right? So now we have access to this large language model. At the time, it was GPT 3.5, and you can start to talk with it. Really cool. And that's what we're doing here today. All right, let's talk about generative. So we're talking about generative AI, which means we can go in and ask the model to create some form of media or code or other forms of data for us. So generative in this case with ChatGPT is text, or if you're using Dolly, it could be an image. But with generative AI, it can encompass all kinds of different media types, including audio, video, even code can be created with generative AI. So that's the G. Pre-trained, yep. So when you're creating a large language model, the models are pre-trained on a corpus of text. But in the case of ChatGPT, humans were involved in that training, right? So we need guardrails when the large language model begins to generate answers. We just don't want any kind of information out there. So you can see this is called RLHF, or reinforcement learning from human feedback. All right, so that's part of the pre-trained part of ChatGPT. And finally, the transformer. Now, without the transformer, we wouldn't even be here. Okay, this is the secret sauce that runs ChatGPT, and you're going to see here in just a little bit that when you enter in a prompt, you get a result that comes back. Now, the transformer is the technology that makes that work. Okay, and we're going to get a little bit of a breakdown of that here in just a bit. All right. And Susan, I'm so glad you're here. Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, for those of you that are here live, I do appreciate you being here. I am going to be looking at that chat box. So if you do happen to have any comments or questions as I go through this, go ahead and let it fly. All right. So now, just a little bit of history here. This is going to give you some context as far as where we're at today and where things are going into 2024. So first, OpenAI was founded back in December of 2015. So, it's been around for a little bit now. The transformer that I mentioned is part of a paper that was released by Google and the scientists over there called Attention is All You Need. And in that paper, the transformer is described. Again, this is the engine that runs ChatGPT. The first GPT model was created in June of 2018, GPT-2 2019. And you can see there's a little number under there. That's the number of parameters is within the model. So GPT-2 had 1.5 billion. GPT-3 was released in May of 2020 with 175 billion parameters. Instruct GPT, which was part of the technology that assists with the quality of the results that are coming back from ChatGPT, March 2020. GPT-4, believe it or not, GPT-4 was actually in play. You didn't have access to it, but other people did. So it was privately available with 1 trillion parameters, at least that's the estimate. And then we finally get our hands on ChatGPT in November 2022 with 175 billion parameters. And then the public release of GPT-4 was March of 2023. What's the next version? I don't know. So some people are saying that GPT-4.5 is going to come out Q1 of 2024 with all these additional parameters and multimodal functionality and who knows what else. So advancements continue, and I fully expect to see some type of update within 2024 from OpenAI. Time to 1 million users. Many of you have seen this stat before. It didn't take long for people to check out ChatGPT and see that this is going to be pretty interesting to use. It's going to be valuable. And so within 5 days, they were already at to 1 million users. Compare that to Netflix or some of these other platforms. You can see that there was massive amounts of interest. And so, Tom, if ChatGPT is so smart, we could just ask it to train us on how to use ChatGPT, right? No need for all these trainings. Well, sure. I'm going to get into hallucinating later on. So, and how ChatGPT just makes things up. But it does give you some good information about how ChatGPT works, but you always want to check those answers from ChatGPT. Some key features and capabilities of ChatGPT. It's going to increase your productivity. I know for myself personally that there are many different workflows that I use ChatGPT for, whether it be for data analysis or going in and some help for creating a script, or just getting ideas on how to solve a problem. So, there's a lot that it can do as far as increasing your productivity. I believe it increases your creativity. Again, if you work in partnership with ChatGPT, there are a lot of things you can use it for. I know that from my writing, that if I'm stuck or I need an idea or a different way of looking at a concept, I'll just go to ChatGPT and strike up a conversation and see if it has any ideas that I could borrow or use. And it gives you solutions. It can solve problems. So if you give it some information and ask it to go forward and solve a problem, it'll take a crack at it. So it's kind of interesting to use ChatGPT, not just from generating text, but actually working in partnership or in tandem with it to solve a problem. There are limitations though, right? And so Tom, this is what I was talking about with hallucinating, which I'll get to in just a moment. But some of the limitations include bias. You have to remember that with GPT 3, 5, and 4, that this is trained on a large corpus of text, essentially just the whole entire internet. And of course, with all of that information in there, inherently, there's going to be bias baked into the whole entire model. So keep that in mind. Privacy issues. Yeah. What about your personal data? If you have a Plus account and you are uploading your prompts and your information there, that could be all part of the training set for future versions of ChatGPT. Now, if you're working as a business, there are additional options, either the brand new team option or enterprise, that will secure your data. So data privacy is really critical. Hallucinating, yeah, it'll just make things up confidently. So you need to always double check your work with ChatGPT. Social aspects. Yeah, so from a social standpoint, what about people that don't have access to AI? And how is that going to go ahead and play out from a societal standpoint? It's a really big issue. So it's something that we want to think about as we move forward with this technology. Governance, need to have guardrails in place. This is critical. So we know that in Europe, in the States, in Canada, there is active movement in creating legislation to protect people from nefarious usages of artificial intelligence. But none of that is in stone yet. The technology is advancing forward. And so we really need to make sure that we have in place these protections, including updates to copyright law, so we have a clear idea moving forward how to use the technology properly. And finally, security. Again, if you're using your own personal information, your company information, make sure that is with the model that the information is not going to be shared or the model is not going to be trained on it. Okay, so again, there are secure ways to use ChatGPT. So make sure that if you are trying to use ChatGPT within your company, that you talk to IT or cybersecurity or whoever is in charge of making sure that it is locked down and secure before you use it. All right, now let's get into how all this works. And we're going to take a little journey with natural language processing, or NLP. Now, you experience this day in and day out already. And with NLP, you can think of all kinds of various applications that you use, from texting to navigational instructions, right? Uh, like text correction. It's all natural language processing. And that's a big part of ChatGPT. So massively important when it comes to interfacing with language models. And now we're going to take a look at the connection between natural language processing and ChatGPT. Again, just keep in mind that you use it already with autocorrect on your phone, and when you talk to, your smartphone, your voice is being converted over to text, and then natural language processing kicks in. So yeah, we use it day in and day out. So with ChatGPT, it was trained on a large corpus of text, and the idea behind it is that we have this large database of words. And when we prompt ChatGPT, it's going to go in and give us a response back through prediction. Now, I know when I first started using ChatGPT, I thought it was pulling answers from the internet. And I think a lot of people believe that too, but that is not the case whatsoever. In this case, we have text prediction, word by word. That's all based upon probability. And so when you enter your prompt into ChatGPT, it's going to go through the transformer. You get a result coming back. And this is one of the reasons why when you use the same prompt, notice how you don't get the same answer? Well, yeah, it's the reason for that is there's different probability in play. And so all it takes is one word to change based upon probability, and the resulting words, the words following after, are going to be completely different, which is fascinating. That's one of the things that really honestly confused me when I first started working with it. I'm like, how can I be using the same prompt and I get different results back? Totally confusing. Now that I understand it, it makes sense. But at the time, very confusing. And last I want to talk about temperature. No, not the temperature outside, but actually the temperature that's used to mess around with that probability. Let's say you want to get like really creative. You can crank up the temperature and have all kinds of creative results that are outside of the norm, or you can turn the temperature down and have very strict results back. So it messes with the probability. Okay, so this is the workflow of how your prompt goes through ChatGPT. And I'm going to walk you through this here and go over each one of these with you. I got to give you a little bit of context, though, on this particular example. So during COVID, I picked up a hobby, and that hobby is smoking food. And it's funny because I've had many hobbies, over my lifetime. And my wife is like, listen, this particular hobby is smoking food. Don't give that one up. The beer brewing thing, yeah, you can let that go. So even to this day, I'm still smoking food. Now, when I see a brand new large language model, like when Bard came out or Anthropic Claude, I have a control statement. Like I use the same prompt over and over again to test the model. Like I want to see what the result is for each of these models. And based upon my control statement, I kind of get an idea of where it's at. So my control statement is how do I cook a smoked potato salad, right? So hopefully someday you can try my smoked potato salad. If you keep on watching these episodes, I'll give you the recipe. Okay. Not this one, but it'll probably show up in the show notes sometime. That's the control statement that I use every single time. And so now we are going to take a journey and walk this prompt through ChatGPT. So let's say I type in this prompt, how do I cook a smoked potato salad? And the first thing that happens is something called text pre-processing. So the text is going to be simplified. Now, this can, depending upon the large language model, this can show up in all kinds of different ways. Punctuation is removed, capitalization can be uh, controlled or sent back to lowercase, that kind of thing. So again, depending upon the model, text is pre-processed. Now, when I first started working with ChatGPT, I was under the impression that during text pre-processing, letters that were capitalized would be converted to lowercase, and that is not the case at all. From what I understand, uppercase letters, like if you make a word all uppercase, it's going to be emphasized. It's almost like you're yelling at ChatGPT, right? I really want you to focus in on this word. So capitalization does work in ChatGPT. Now, all this pre-processing, it's for the next step, and it's for the tokenization. So the tokenization is when we begin to break these words apart into segments. Now, because this is going to be sent through a software program, the transformer, the words need to be converted into numbers. And that's all this process is. So it's taking your sentences, breaking them apart into separate words, right? After the text pre-processing. And then those words are assigned a number. Now, this is called a vector. I'm not going to get into heavy math today with you. Okay. But so this whole entire process is extremely technical. But let's just say, hey, these words that I send to ChatGPT have a unique number, like based upon where they are in the sentence, the word and the connotation and what the word means, all has that number assigned to it. Then we have something called forward pass. This is where your words, as they are converted into numbers, are then sent through the neural network, and a whole bunch of different things happen inside of this neural network. We have weights and biases and activation functions. So it's kind of like this big recipe. It's like we're mixing things up based upon how that neural network is programmed. And then we're going to go ahead and get some type of result from this dish that we're creating. Okay. All right. Now, as it goes through the forward pass and through the neural network, There's a really specific part of that I do want to bring attention to, and it's called self-attention. So self-attention is when there are words that are extremely important in a sentence. In this case, how do I cook a smoked potato salad? Words like cook, smoked, potato, and salad, really important. And so what's interesting is that when I first started prompting this, depending upon how I use the sentence, initially ChatGPT would not allow me to do this because it was thought I was physically smoking a potato. So it's like, no, that would be very unhealthy. So that was a word that had a lot of attention to it. I was just trying to figure out how to use it properly. All right, so it goes through the neural network, then a response comes back, and but it comes back as numbers, or it comes back as vectors. Well, I don't need those. I actually need words. So those vectors, numbers, are then converted back into words. But yeah, that doesn't look so good. Like, we need to go ahead and post process this text. So capitalization, again, any kind of punctuation is then added back in, and you finally get your result. Wow, that's pretty amazing, right? Again, if you ever wondered why when you're using GPT-4, like, why is this thing so slow? Well, the computational power of this type of process is immense. It's massive. I have seen some language models run locally on a local machine, and it completely taxes your GPU to the max. So imagine millions of people trying to run these types of prompts. No wonder sometimes that it slows down, or they limit you the number of requests that you can make every 3 hours or so. Okay. Well, hopefully that gives you a better understanding of how ChatGPT works. And now let's go ahead and let's start prompting. Yes. So now you're probably wondering, like, well, what's up with that image? Well, we're going to keep it really simple here today, and we're going to prompt with Mary had a little lamb. And I'm going to give you some background as to what's happening with ChatGPT as we're prompting. I'm also going to be using the 4 model today. If you want to use the 3.5 model, hey, that's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do a little bit of prompting here. By the way, if you didn't know, I asked ChatGPT to go ahead and make an image here, and I used a very simple prompt. And when it does that in Dolly, it actually creates a different prompt to make that image. It's pretty fascinating. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to create a brand new chat. And all we're going to do is type in the word Mary. That's it. Just type in the word Mary. And so we're going to see what happens with ChatGPT when we type in the word Mary. Now, again, this is the GPT-4 model. You can be using 3.5. All right, it has no clue here. So let's build up the poem a little bit and say Mary had. All right, and we're going to run that. All right, so it hasn't gotten it yet. Now, for some of you, it may have picked up on that you want Mary had a little lamb. Let's keep going. Let's just say Mary had a. Now, it's funny because I'm going to keep going. When I was doing this earlier to test this out, it already picked up on the poem at this point. Now, of course, when you're doing it live, it always, right, it doesn't work. So finally, and now it's asking me, okay, so I understand that you are looking for Mary had a little lamb, the poem. And Brian's saying that this is the same test saw at Vanderbilt University. That's cool. I'm glad I'm not the only one testing this out. And so let's just do it all the way through. Mary had a little lamb. And let's see if it gives us the whole poem. And there it goes. What's interesting here, it decides to put in a code block. Again, this is, for some of you, it's probably writing the poem outside of code. But again, this is the probability. My answer is going to be different than your answer. And also, what I want to point out too is that when you are prompting and you continue to build upon the prompts, we call this a prompt chain, it's going to go in and remember both what you've prompted and the prior result. So once it recognized that this is a poem, Mary Had a Little Lamb, the probability of related results to Mary Had a Little Lamb are way high. They're very high. And so, when you're prompt chaining like this, again, there is impact into those results. All right. So some people also call this the context window. So within the context window, as you continue to prompt and have a conversation, any prior results, any prior prompts changes the probability. All right. So let's go ahead and let's try this again with a brand new message box. So one of the things you want to think about when you first begin working with ChatGPT and uploading your messages to the transformer, because that's what's happening here, is when you want to have a new conversation, when you want to start from scratch, don't continue prompting in the message box from a prior conversation, because anything that you put in there has impact on all future results. So we want to start clean. So let's click on new chat or new message, and I'm going to type in Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now, one thing I want to point out here before you run this. When you send a message to ChatGPT without any context, this is what we call a zero-shot prompt. Like, I don't have any examples in here. Now, if I were to say, hey, Mary Had a Little Lamb, this is a poem in this format, that's a one-shot prompt. Anytime that you give ChatGPT an example of what you are looking for, that's a one-shot. In this case, we are just like wheeling and dealing with the model. And this is a zero-shot prompt. So to wrap it up here today, let's go ahead and type in Mary Had a Little Lamb. Let's go ahead and run this. And it sure does know it. Okay, so somewhere in the model, there's a high probability that when you type in Mary Had a Little Lamb, it's going to go ahead and give you the entire poem. And if you're in GPT-4, you can have a lot of fun with this and just say something like, make an image of this. And the multimodal capabilities kick in, and DALL-E should make an image of Mary Had a Little Lamb, the poem. So as it's working through here, before we get the result, I want to thank you for attending this episode of Brainpower. Thank you so much for hanging with me. And just want to let you know that in the show notes, which you can find up on my website, joshcavalier.ai or joshcavalier.com, you'll get detailed information about this episode and upcoming episodes. And check it out. That is a really cool image from DALL-E with the poem. Lifting my spirits up, that's for sure. Okay. Hey, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope to see you in future episodes, and I will see you down the road. Take care.